If you follow the news closely, not only at this moment as we are speaking, Trump administration is rather busy. Not only President Trump just quickly wrap up his trip in the Middle East, and also keep in mind the trade war between US and China at this moment is not seeing any feasible solutions. Now, remember last time when you and I, we had a conversation when we talk about this ongoing economic competition between US and China, it's not just about those two largest economies. Another country in the Southeast Asia, it's rather crucial, which is Vietnam. And also recently, and get this, leaders of ASEAN is going to convene a large meeting in Malaysia, and given the fact that those countries need to understand and figure out what the next step should take in order to ease the tension between the US and those countries, and particularly Donald Trump has not loosened up some of the tariffs. Now, when it comes to tariffs, how much does Donald Trump really understand? And after going through this transition with some of the countries or even the negotiations. But meanwhile, rumor has it that Vietnam is unlikely to be squeezed between US and China. And at this moment, this nation is looking for new friends. Does it work? And how much do we understand it could change the relationships at this moment? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who is the Dr. Hong Nguyen. Dr. Hai is currently a senior lecturer of politics and social change and international relations in the College of Arts and Science at VinUniversity in Vietnam. And he's a political scientist and experienced lecturer in politics and international relations. And he's also one amazing academic fellow at the American University. Well, Dr. Hai, welcome to The Missing Piece.
Thank you very much, Will.
Well, Dr. Hai, again, as I mentioned before, right now, Vietnam, again, I want to be careful, is standing at the crossroads. And especially we're looking at this economic competition between US and China. I want to read a statement to you, and I want to get your interpretation first. And I quote, that right now, Vietnam is trying to pursue or continue to maintain this bamboo diplomacy, bending but not breaking when bigger powers huff and puff. Dr. Hai, from your perspective, let's look at the term bamboo diplomacy in the year of 2025. How should we define bamboo diplomacy at this moment? And also, what does that mean that when we say not breaking but bending when bigger powers huff and puff? Your thoughts?
Well, thank you, Will. I think that's also a very interesting questions, particularly when people talking about Vietnam is walking on the tightrope between China's and the United States. Now, the term bamboo diplomacy have been discussed and have been coined for a couple of years now in order to represent for a new type of Vietnam's diplomacy, or more precisely, to represent the characteristics of Vietnam diplomacy. Now, it means that, well, Vietnam is strong enough and is resilient enough in order to respond to storms and also crises from outside. And because, in Vietnamese culture, the bamboo tree is very strong, very resilient, and it can stand for even strong wind, and is very flexible too. So it does somehow, it reflects the approach Vietnam is taking at the moment, particularly in the competition between the United States and China. So Vietnam, of course, on the one hand, it's realized that China is very important for Vietnam, particularly not because of is a big neighbor, but also because it is a very important in terms of security and trade. But on the other hand, for Vietnam, particularly when Vietnam is pursuing its development goals, two centenary development goals. Um, so it sees the United States is very important partners and strategic partners. That no one in the world, no countries in the world is more important than the United States for Vietnam, because the United States is a source not only of investment but also a source of technology. And Vietnam, in order to achieve its centenary development goals and also to become a developed country and to transform successfully from the digital perspective and high tech perspective. The United States play a very important role in that sense. So Vietnam is trying to balance the relationship. Of course, the recent impositions of very high tariff of the Trump administrations on Vietnam, of course, it is from 46%, but now down to 10% universally, including Vietnam. So I think even though the levies now is lower, but still, who knows after 90 days. The time frames that the Trump administrations set out for all countries, including Vietnam's. So Vietnam still need to, give the balance between the United States and China. So I think in this context, bamboo diplomacy is still very relevant in the sense that Vietnam is willing to be flexible, but also must be well prepared for any storms and any crisis that it might face, in particularly in a very uncertain world, and also in the very high competition between China and the United States.
Well, again, Dr. Hai, I agree with you 100%. When we look at modern day economic shift, the better word is unpredictability. So in other words, we don't know what will happen to the stock market and what could happen to the global economy. But one thing, again, as I mentioned in the intro, some believe that Vietnam right now is being air quote squeezed between US and China. And also more economists claim to say right now at this moment, Vietnam is one major player in Southeast Asia. The priority for Vietnam today seems to be to reduce its reliance on America and China. Now, I know that when we look at this political partnership, it's very much different from this economic relationship. So, Dr. Hai, from your perspective, is it possible or even is it feasible for Vietnam to reduce the reliance on America and China? If so, what purpose? So in other words, what will be the main reason for Vietnam to reduce its reliance on both countries? Is it only because to pull itself out of this competition, or maybe out of this awkward situation? Or perhaps at this moment, Vietnam is trying to re-strategize itself in order to create bigger progress? Your thoughts?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Will. And I just, pick up the words that you also mentioned. That is the strategizations by Vietnam. So, of course, Vietnam is strategizing its partnership, its markets, and also its partners. So I completely agree that Vietnam doesn't want to rely too much on one partners or another. We often say we should not put all the eggs in a one basket because it's very risky. And I think that also Vietnam learns that lesson in the history and in the past when it relied on one or another. And it will, pay the consequences, not only from the relationship between Vietnam and that partners, but also in the international relations too. So Vietnam doesn't want to absolutely rely on the United States or China, and that's why Vietnam expand its partnership to other countries around the world. Now this week, Vietnam is welcoming French President Emmanuel Macron, and also in a very short times, it also welcomes the president of Hungary. So you see, so far this year, Vietnam has a very had a busy, international relations agenda. It has welcomed a lot of world leaders to Vietnam, and also Vietnamese leaders have visited many other countries in the world, including Russia and other countries in Central Europe. So that is Vietnam's strategy. Vietnam's want to expand its market, expand its networks, and Vietnam want to establish a well network in the Indo-Pacific in order to diversify its market and also diversify its source of imports. So I think that's a very smart strategy by the Vietnamese leaders. And of course, in ASEAN too, Vietnam's also leading the ways to call for strengthening internal collaborations in trade and also in investment. So I think that's also another way that Vietnam not only think of its own interest, but also think of in a broader sense the ASEAN interest, because Vietnam's now is consider itself as an integral part of ASEAN. So anything happen within ASEAN, it will adversely impact on Vietnam. So that's why Vietnam also think that even though it take a bilateral approach, but a multilateral approach within ASEAN in order to strengthen ASEAN, in order to create a peaceful and also stable environment for Vietnam. I think that's also good too. So I think in the broader sense, I would say Vietnam really want to diversify its market and its networks of partnership.
Well, Dr. Hai, in addition to welcoming all the international leaders and luminaries to Vietnam, but there's another piece of breaking news that related to Trump family, not the Trump administration. Then the news came that outside Hanoi, 1.5 billion golf complex, it's in the process under Trump Trump family. So in other words, this is going to be a major project, and for the first time that Trump's family implemented the project in Vietnam. So Dr. Hai, from your perspective, again, I don't know whether you golf or not, and to be honest, I really don't, because I hate to embarrass myself at the golf court. But when we look at such business deals under Trump family, not the Trump administration, what does that say about Trump's interest? I mean, again, we know that Donald Trump is a businessman, and he constantly looks for deals, not only for his family, but also for his own wealth. So by establishing this complicated golf complex outside Hanoi, again, what kind of image does Donald Trump shape in front of the international audience, and what kind of noises does that send to the international leaders? Your thoughts?
Well, this is a topic that has been, recurrently discussed in social media, and in different forums. I know that. Of course, I'm not a golf player, but still, is an investment project. So, anything about investment that would for Vietnam and that would help to develop Vietnam's. I think that's also good and should be welcome. Now, before we talked about the launch of the project just a few days ago, outside of Hanoi, with a total investment of $1.5 billion. I think we should mention the fact that this project was negotiated even before Donald Trump was elected the president of the United States. So, I mean, discussion and negotiation, and also the the project's initiative and idea was formulated and also began well before even the election in the United States last year. So does that mean that the project? Of course, now Trump was elected as the president of the United States, so people can be easily link the project with his presidency. But as I said, the project was discussed and negotiated even well before. So I think people should be aware of that, and that's the fact. And of course, if we think of the bamboo diplomacy again, or what I term is that smart diplomacy by Vietnam, because Vietnam is, first of all, welcomed, foreign investment, anyone that want to invest in Vietnam. So Vietnam welcome, and of course, the Trump organization is a big investors. I think the Trump administration organization has invested not only in Vietnam, but it has invested in other countries in Southeast Asia and also in Asia too. So now it's understandable when Vietnam is becoming a very dynamic market, very huge market. So and Vietnam has a needs to develop high quality infrastructures. So I think this sort of project and with the purpose of the Trump organizations doing business and making profits. So I think there's no doubt that Vietnam is caught in the eyes of the Trump organizations. So yeah, I see that is a natural development. And of course, now people link it with the Trump administration, with Trump's presidency. I think that's true. That's the fact, because he's now, of course, the president of the United States. But I think it happened now in a context and in the process of negotiating trade agreements between Vietnam and the United States. So I think that's also one way to show that Vietnam is very serious about balancing trade between balancing the investments between Vietnam and United States. So I think this project, $1.5 billion, I think is nothing comparing to the total, trade volume between Vietnam and United States, which was recorded about 135 or 36 million US dollars. So it's nothing, but still, it showed Vietnam is willing to welcome more investment from the United States and try to balance the trade between Vietnam and United States. So I think that's a good news, and that's a good way for the two countries. And of course, Vietnam should welcome more investment from the Trump organizations if they have the ability to do so.
Well, I agree with you 100%, Dr. Hyde. Surely, country like Vietnam would never turn away such profitable investment from international luminaries and leaders and guests. Now, I want to ask you two more questions before letting you go. Let's talk about China. We know that Trump is not a lone wolf. Any decision makes that cannot happen without thorough and detailed consultation. Now, one of the, when we say loud a consultant or speakers around Donald Trump, its current economic advisor, it's called Peter Navarro. Now, Peter Navarro recently said, and I quote Dr. Hai, China uses Vietnam to transship to evade the tariffs. And the United States seem to be arguing that anything that comes from China is by default transshipment. So you tar and feather every single product that comes from China. So in other words, end quote, what Trump administration or what those economic advisors believe that Vietnam, I want to be careful, is being played by China or is being used as China to negotiate with the U.S. So Dr. Hai, from your perspective, what role do you see China play when we look at this economic relationship between US and Vietnam at this moment? And how much do we understand that China is willing to be that role or perhaps unwilling to be that role? Your thoughts?
Well, I think now the issue was even, raised in the Trump first administration. And of course, in the context of rising competition and rivalry between China and United States. And of course, many foreign investors and companies, including American companies in the United States, fear the negative impact from that kind of competition between the two major powers. And that's why we have heard about the decoupling movements of foreign companies. They've been trying to find new destination for their investment in Southeast Asia or in a low price market. So I think Vietnam, of course, has and is emerging as a very attractive destination for foreign companies to move out of China in order to reinvest in another countries so that they can make profits. So that's understandable, and that's why many companies move from China to Vietnam, including of course China's companies and Americans invested company. So I think it understandable. And when Trump's economics and trade advisors see that goods exported from Vietnam is a way that Chinese companies are trying to avoid the levy and also the high level of tariffs. But I think that's they need to understand that fight. It's not merely a movements or transshipment from China to Vietnam as simple as they thought. It is very complicated, and they need to also assess and look at the fact. And of course, I think it's understandable when China's in that context. They also need to find way in order to avoid and also to protect their interest. But I think Vietnam has been doing quite well and is has been fully aware of the any what we I could put in the quote that illegal transshipment or illegal imports from other sources, including China's, and then goods again exported to United States. Vietnam, I would say Vietnam is not so stupid in order for China to abuse it as a way to avoid taxation or high tariff imposed by the United States, because Vietnams understand well the consequences of allowing that happen, and that's why the Vietnamese government has called for strengthening the monitorings of any shipment or any illegal imports from China's that then ended up going to the United States. So I think I understand that in a very complex and complicated world today, countries trying to mix or use another way in order to protect its interest. But Vietnam is not an exception. So Vietnam is also trying to protect its interests too, and Vietnam is fully aware of any consequences. That, as I said, if the United States discover any coverings of illegal shipment from China to the United States. So yes, the Vietnam is fully aware of that. So I think but the United States should be fully aware of and should have more objective assessment.
Dr. Hai, I want to ask you the last question. Again, as you mentioned before, current French President Emmanuel Macron is set to visit Vietnam. And of course, that not only he is going to stop at Vietnam, and also he's interested in visiting other countries in Southeast Asia and also on ASEAN. Now, I want to ask you the last question is, what can we expect between the French president and the head of the government in Vietnam? So in other words, why his visit it's rather contributive and rather indispensable for this Vietnam and France relationship. What can we expect at the end of the day? Your final thoughts.
Well, President Macron is now in Vietnam already, and I assume that you know tomorrow's Vietnam's time is the last day he is in Vietnam. So he has met with high-ranking officers. Of course, he have talked with the Vietnamese state president. He also had talk and also meetings with the party secretary general of the Communist Party of Vietnam. So I just read the news that France and Vietnam signed more than 10 agreements to boost collaboration and also investment in Vietnam's. One of the key areas that Vietnam want to collaborate with the French is the high tech industry and also education. And I think the developments of France and Vietnam's relations is a natural. To know that Vietnam was a colony of France, and so they already have a some kind of bondage, I would say, and relationship, at the people level already. So I think, and on the other hand, French is also emphasizing and wanted to promote the implementation of their Indo-Pacific strategy. So Vietnam is a not only a traditional partners, traditional friends, but also a key player in the Indo-Pacific and key partners in the Indo-Pacific. So I think there's no doubt that France, particularly French President Macron, who's passed and adopted the Indo-Pacific strategy, want to promote the relationship between France and Vietnam, and in fact, the invitation to French Emmanuel Macron went to and even was further referred back about 2 or 3 years ago. And that said, his visits to Vietnam has been planned for a couple of years now. So, and I think, and then the world situation change, and it of course it has some impact on his schedules visits to Vietnam. And I think we expect that after these visits, um, more substantive and effective collaborations between Vietnam and France will be further promoted. And I think for the France, I think that they have ignored, or they have neglected these reasons for many years, and I think that is a mistake, because they have been too much focused on Europe, or somehow Africa, but they have neglected Southeast Asia, more particularly Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Those were three colonies in the past. So, and with the emergence of Southeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific, I think that's now the time for them to refocus on the relationship between the three countries, more particularly Vietnam, because Vietnam is one of the key players in the regions, and also among the three countries. So I think it's just understandable if we can see more development and more collaborations between Vietnam and France in the coming times.
Well, surely, Dr. Hai, this is one of the promising, and it's also mentioned before, it's a productive time for international leaders and international luminaries pay the short visit to Vietnam. Again, it's not just about boosting the domestic economy, and also it serves an opportunity for Vietnam to reshape its international image. Well, ladies and gentlemen, again, such an honor to speak to Dr. Hai Hong Nguyen. Dr. Hai currently is one amazing academic fellow at the American University, and he's an expert on politics, social change, and international relations. And I strongly encourage everyone go online to connect with Dr. Hai. Again, Dr. Hai, thank you so much for your insights. Every time we enjoyed it so much. Love to have you back on the show as we continue to follow other international leaders, their trip and their visit to the nation of Vietnam. So thank you so much for doing this.